Chapter 6, A Wandering Eagle, by Arthur Conan Doyle. My father seemed to be much of Jim Horscroft's opinion, for he was not over-warm to this new guest, and looked him up and down with a very questioning eye. He set a dish of vinegared herrings before him, however, and I noticed that he looked more askance than ever when my companion ate 9 of them, for 2 were always our portion. When at last he had finished, Bonaventure de Lapp's lids were drooping over his eyes, for I doubt that he had been sleepless as well as foodless for these 3 days. It was but a poor room to which I had led him, but he threw himself down upon the couch, wrapped his big blue cloak around him, and was asleep in an instant. He was a very high and strong snorer, and as my room was next to his, I had reason to remember that we had a stranger within our gates. When I came down in the morning, I found that he had been beforehand with me, for he was seated opposite my father at the window table in the kitchen, their heads almost touching, and a little roll of gold pieces between them. As I came in, my father looked up at me, and I saw a light of greed in his eyes such as I had never seen before. He caught up the money with an eager clutch and swept it into his pocket. "Very good, mister," said he. "The room's yours, and you pay always on the 3rd of the month." "Ah, and here is my first friend," cried de Lapp, holding out his hand to me with a smile which was kindly enough, and yet had that touch of patronage which a man uses when he smiles to his dog. "I am myself again now, thanks to my excellent supper and good night's rest. Ah, it is hunger that takes the courage from a man, that most, and cold next." "Aye, that's right," said my father. "I've been out on the moors in a snowdrift for 36 hours, and ken what it's like." "I once saw 3,000 men starve to death," remarked de Lapp, putting out his hands to the fire. "Day by day they got thinner and more like apes, and they did come down to the edge of the pontoons where we did keep them, and they howled with rage and pain. The first few days their howls went over the whole city, but after a week our sentries on the bank could not hear them, so weak they had fallen." "And they died," I exclaimed. "They held out a very long time. Austrian grenadiers they were, of the Corps of Starowitz, fine stout men as big as your friend of yesterday, but when the town fell there were but 400 alive, and a man could lift them 3 at a time as if they were little monkeys. It was a pity. Ah, my friend, you will do me the honors with Madame and with Mademoiselle." It was my mother and Eddie who had come into the kitchen. He had not seen them the night before, but now it was all I could do to keep my face as I watched him, for instead of our homely Scottish nod, he bent up his back like a looping trout and slid his foot and clapped his hand over his heart in the queerest way. My mother stared, for she thought he was making fun of her, but Cousin Eddie fell into it in an instant, as though it had been a game, and away she went in a great curtsy until I thought she would have had to give it up and sit down right there in the middle of the kitchen floor. But no, she up again as light as a piece of fluff, and we all drew up our stools and started on the scones and milk and porridge. He had a wonderful way with women, that man. Now if I were to do it, or Jim Horscroft, it would look as if we were playing the fool, and the girls would have laughed at us. But with him, it seemed to go with his style of face and fashion of speech, so that one came at last to look for it. For when he spoke to my mother or cousin Eddie, and he was never backward in speaking, it would always be with a bow and a look, as if it would hardly be worth their while to listen to what he had to say, and when they answered, he would put on a face, as though every word they said was to be treasured up and remembered forever. And yet, even while he humbled himself to a woman, there was always a proud sort of look at the back of his eye, as if he meant to say that it was only to them that he was so meek, and that he could be stiff enough upon occasion. As to my mother, it was wonderful the way she softened to him, and in half an hour she had told him all about her uncle, who was a surgeon in Carlisle, and the highest of any upon her side of the house. She spoke to him about my brother Rob's death, which I had never heard her mention to a soul before, and he looked as if the tears were in his eyes over it, he who had just told us how he had seen 3,000 men starve to death. As to Eddie, she did not say much, but she kept shooting little glances at our visitor, and once or twice he looked very hard at her. When he had gone to his room after breakfast, my father pulled out 8 golden pounds and laid them on the table. "What think ye of that, Martha?" said he. "You've sold the twa black tups after all." No, but it's a month's pay for board and lodging from Jock's friend, and as much to come every 4 weeks. But my mother shook her head when she heard it. £2 a week is overmuch, said she, and it is not when the poor gentleman is in distress that we should put such a price on his bit food. Tut, cried my father, he can very well afford it, and he with a bag full of gold. Besides, it's his own proposing. No blessing will come from that money, said she. Why, woman, he's turned your head, why, his foreign ways of speech, cried my father. Aye, and it would be a good thing if Scottish men had a little more of that kindly way, she said, and that was the first time in all my life that I had heard her answer him back. He came down soon and asked me whether I would come out with him. When we were in the sunshine, he held out a little cross made of red stones, one of the bonniest things that ever I had set eyes upon. These are rubies, said he, and I got it at Tudela in Spain. There were 2 of them, but I gave the other to a Lithuanian girl. I pray that you will take this as a memory of your exceedingly kindness to me yesterday. It will fashion into a pin for your cravat. I could but thank him for the present, which was of more value than anything I had ever owned in my life. I am off to the upper muir to count the lambs, said I. Maybe you would care to come up with me and see something of the country. He hesitated for a moment, and then he shook his head. I have some letters, he said, which I ought to write as soon as possible. I think that I will stay at quiet this morning and get them written. All forenoon I was wandering over the links, and you may imagine that my mind was turning all the time upon this strange man whom chance had drifted to our doors. Where did he gain that style of his, that manner of command, that haughty menacing glint of the eye? And his experiences to which he referred so lightly, how wonderful the life must have been which had put him in the way of them. He had been kind to us and gracious of speech, but still I could not quite shake myself clear of the distrust with which I had regarded him. Perhaps, after all, Jim Horscroft had been right, and I had been wrong about taking him to Westinch. When I got back, he looked as though he had been born and bred in the steading. He sat in the big wooden-armed ingle chair with the black cat on his knee. His arms were out, and he held a skein of worsted from hand to hand, which my mother was busily rolling into a ball. Cousin Eddie was sitting near, and I could see by her eyes that she had been crying. "Hullo, Eddie," said I, "what's the trouble?" "Ah, mademoiselle, like all good and true women, has a soft heart," said he. I didn't thought it would have moved her, or I should have been silent. I have been talking of the suffering of some troops of which I knew something when they were crossing the Guadarrama Mountains in the winter of 1808. Ah, yes, it was very bad, for they were fine men and fine horses. It is strange to see men blown by the wind over the precipices, but the ground was so slippery, and there was nothing to which they could hold. So companies all linked arms, and they did better in that fashion, but one artilleryman's hand came off as I held it, for he had had the frostbite for 3 days. I stood staring, with my mouth open. And the old grenadiers, too, who were not so active as they used to be, they could not keep up. And yet if they lingered, the peasants would catch them and crucify them to the barn doors with their feet up and a fire under their heads, which was a pity for these fine old soldiers. So when they could go no further, it was interesting to see what they would do, for they would sit down and say their prayers, sitting on an old saddle, or their knapsacks maybe, and then take off their boots and their stockings and lean their chin on the barrel of their musket. Then they would put their toe on the trigger, and poof, it was all over, and there was no more marching for those fine old grenadiers. Oh, it was very rough work up there on these Guadarrama Mountains. And what army was this? I asked. Oh, I have served in so many armies that I mix them up sometimes. Yes, I have seen much of war. Apropos, I have seen your Scotchmen fight, and very stout fantassins they make, but I thought from them that the folk over here all wore, how do you say it, petticoats. Those are the kilts, and they wear them only in the Highlands. Ah, on the mountains, but there is a man out yonder. Maybe he is the one who your father said would carry my letters to the post. Yes, he is Farmer Whitehead's man. Shall I give them to him? Well, he would be more careful of them if he had them from your hand. He took them from his pocket and gave them over to me. I hurried out with them, and as I did so, my eyes fell upon the address of the topmost one. It was written very large and clear. A son majest. Le Roi de Suède. Stockholm. I did not know very much French, but I had enough to make that out. What sort of eagle was this which had flown into our humble little nest?